Lots of people are chasing that polished radio-ready pop vocal sound, but what they don't realize is that there's no amount of compression, EQ, or fancy vocal change that will get you there if you're skipping these crucial steps. If your vocals feel like they're messy or they seem impossible to mix, it's probably because you're not paying enough attention to these super important details. Now, I make a living producing and mixing vocals, and today I'm going to share with you 5 details that I think are really often overlooked. We all know about vocal tuning and vocal line and compression, EQ, all that kind of stuff, but there's steps that we need to take before we even start thinking about those things. And I promise you that if you can nail these 5 small details, you're going to find mixing your vocals so much easier. So when it comes to mixing, especially vocals, I think people are so keen to start throwing plugins on that they quickly end up feeling frustrated and feeling a bit overwhelmed because their vocals are not sounding right. And I like to think of building a vocal production a bit like building a house, in the sense that your raw vocals are your bricks and mortar, and that's the foundation that everything is built upon. And then your mix, so your plug-in chains, your reverbs, your effects, that's the furniture and the decoration. But if you start trying to slap paint on the walls and move your furniture in before you've let the plaster dry or you've cleaned up all the mess that the builders have left behind, then it's all just going to look terrible. Editing is that stage. It's the plastering, it's the prep work, it's the cleaning up. And if you skip that stage, then your vocals are never going to sound polished, they're never going to sound clean, and they're never going to sound how you want them to sound in the mix. So I have this vocal tracking project here, which is literally left as it was from the recording session when we recorded these vocals. I like to record my vocals in a separate project to the main production, because if you're working in a big production project that's got loads of tracks and stuff, you end up, especially if there's MIDI and things like that, you end up with all kinds of bugs and latency issues and all kinds of crap going on that I just don't want to deal with. So I like to export the instrumental as a 2-track and then bring it into a new fresh project and record in there. So this is what I've got here. I've got the completely unedited raw take folders. And the first thing that I always make sure I do before I do any editing or any mixing or anything like that is to make sure that I've committed the take folders. So in Logic, we have these comp folders which look like this, and you can pick your vocal takes, and it's a really nice way of working because you can go in and choose all the different bits. And I've done this with the artist. I've gone through and picked all the takes that we like and all the best phrases and so on. But if I'm working with this comp, it's really difficult to edit because you sort of delete things and then you can't apply fades and you can't really edit things properly. And you end up like here, I'm trying to undo things and it's not responding in the way that I want it to respond. So in order for me to be able to use all of my editing tools properly and so on, what I need to do is flatten this comp folder. I can just go to flatten, and then I'm working with this as if it's proper audio, and it's just so much easier to clean up. I can go through and edit things. I can now access the fade tool in the top corner, and I've got the marquee tool where I can just cut bits of audio. And it's so much easier if I'm working with a flattened comp folder rather than trying to do it all from within these take folders, because they're very limiting. This process is different from DAW to DAW, and like in Pro Tools, you're working with playlists and so on. But the same principle applies. Make sure that you've committed your takes to a track that you're editing from, and you're not trying to work with something that's just a mess of all these different kind of comps and edits. Commit to your takes, make sure that you've got them where you want them to be, and then edit them from there. One bonus tip for this, if you are working in Logic, is to use the track alternatives here. So if you haven't used this before, basically go to track header components, turn on track alternatives down here, and then what we can do is duplicate this track. I would do this for all the tracks really, and then I can flatten this comp folder, and if I want to go back to that comp at any point and make any changes, because sometimes you need to, maybe you miss something or the artist goes, actually, do you know what, have you got another take on that line, because that always happens, you can at least then always go back. We can just go back to that track alternative and I've got that comp there, and I can still go and access that if I need to. We're still committing, we're still moving forward with this take, but if I do need to go back at all, I can jump backwards and I've not overwritten all that stuff that I've done. Then once you've committed your takes and you're no longer working out of comp folders, the next thing is to clean up your audio properly. I get sent so many vocals where people have not bothered to take the time to clean up the audio, and it just becomes a bit messy. It means I've either got to do it as a mix engineer and go in and clean up vocals, and I'm kind of limited because I don't have access to all the different takes, or it means we're working with stuff that's got loads of junk in it, and I'm just trying to mix around that, and you end up trying to filter things out. And it's just so easily avoidable if we take a bit of time to properly clean up the audio. So doing things like going to the end here where we've got this sort of strange knock at the end of this take. And then there's other things like here, we've got a bit of an overlap on this vocal track. Just a bit of sort of breath and remaining click track. All of that can be tidied up. Hey, on this double track down here, there's like a cough leading up to it.
Am I too gone?
Down here on this higher vocal, there's some noise as well. All of this stuff can just be cleaned up. We can use things like the marquee tool in Logic to just quickly go through and clean all this up. And it takes a few minutes. It is boring, but it's going to make such a big difference to the sound of your vocals when you come to mix, because you're not having to deal with all that junk. And when you start compressing things and you start adding layers of different compression, all it's going to do is raise that noise floor, and all of that junk that's in there is going to become more audible, and it's going to make your mix messier and harder to deal with. So just take the time, take half an hour or whatever to go through and just clean up all your audio. As I say, if you're going to paint on the walls, you've got to make sure that the walls are plastered, they're dry, and they're clean. Point number 3, and this for me is one of the things that I get most vigilant about, and that is pay close attention to the breaths. I can't tell you how many times I get sent vocals where the breaths are like chopping, they've not been cut properly, they've not been rounded off, they've not been smooth. And I'm somebody that likes the vocal to be clear in a track. I like it to be upfront. I work with a lot of pop music where that's necessary. And if the vocals are all choppy in the breaths, it just sounds messy, it sounds amateur, and it's so easily fixed. An example of this is here in this verse. We've got this breath here, which is like chopping into the other breath across the different takes.
Finding all them new kicks now. And I know that.
She goes like, you can hear it here.
And I know that I was good.
And that's just really easy to clean up. Just go in, fade those breaths, make sure that they're not overlapping and that they round it off nicely.
Now. And I know that I was good and things are falling like they should.
And here we've got a double breath where she goes to take a breath in one take and then it happens again in the next take.
But I'm burning out. Finding pockets in the rain clouds.
And to me it sounds hesitant. It sounds a bit almost anxious and like she's not really sure what she's doing with the vocal. So we just clean that up and it's immediately going to sound tighter.
Finding pockets.
Maybe even get rid of it.
Finding pockets in the rain clouds.
It sounds so much cleaner and it makes such a big difference later down the line in the mixing phase. And breaths are a really important thing in the vocal performance. And the way that you treat your breaths is actually really crucial to the mood and the emotion of the performance. People ask sometimes like, should you edit out all your breaths, or, you know, how should you approach it? And my take on it is it kind of depends on the emotion of the song. If you're working with something which is like hyper pop dance music where you want it to be super tight and like compressed and really on the grid, then you can get away with editing out the breaths because the vocal is not necessarily supposed to sound natural. But if you've got a track which is more natural sounding, raw, more intimate, maybe like a folky thing or an acoustic kind of thing, you don't want to go chopping out all the breaths. You want to keep it in, but you can still edit them in a way that sounds smoother and retaining that natural performance. So what I would do on a song like this, where it's an indie pop kind of thing, so it needs that pop sensibility where it feels clean and polished, but it's also needs some of that sort of indie rawness because that's the feel of the song. I would go in and I would take out any breaths that I felt were distracting. So I'd listen to the vocal with the track, and if there's any breaths that I feel like I'm being drawn to that feel out of place, edit them out, but edit them in a way that sounds natural. And I would also ask the question, are those breaths part of the vocal performance, or is it just kind of background breathing as she's preparing for the next line? For example, here, on this line.
And I'm homesick, I don't wanna call, 'cause you're finding all them new kicks now. And I know that
there's a breath here which is kind of in the middle of a phrase, which if I edit this out, it's going to make it sound really unnatural.
Wanna call, 'cause you're finding. And I'm homesick, I don't wanna call, 'cause you're finding all them new kicks now.
It almost adds a pause and kind of makes the vocal lose momentum in a way. So I would add that in because otherwise it sounds unnatural. But then we have this breath here which leads up into the next line.
Now. And I know that I was good and things are falling.
And that's quite dramatic, that breath. So I'd maybe take that away. And I don't think it's really going to affect the mood of the vocal.
I don't wanna call, 'cause you're finding all them new kicks now. And I know that I was good and things are falling like they should.
That just helps keep it clean, it keeps it tidy, but it doesn't sound unnatural. And you might want to leave that in there. It's really up to you. It's a creative choice at the end of the day. But for me, I feel like that's not really adding anything to the story. It's not helping the vocal sound more natural. it's maybe being a bit distracting. So I've gotten rid of that. The next point is pay attention to pops and clicks. Sometimes these can be mouth noises that have come from the singer, or sometimes it's digital clicks from the editing, but making sure that all of these are cleaned up and that they're rounded off and smoothed out as much as possible, because these again will come to the foreground when you're mixing. If you're compressing the vocals super hard, you're going to hear those pops and clicks come up even louder. And also if you've got reverbs and delays going on later on in your mix, and you've got all these pops and clicks happening in the vocal, they're going to jump out, they're going to be accentuated, there's going to be pops and clicks delaying and ping-ponging all over your mix if you're not careful. So making sure that you take a bit of time to edit those out is also crucial. And a good way of putting these under the microscope a bit is to add some really heavy compression. So if I just bring up the compressor here, let's go to the vintage FET and let's set a super fast release, quite a fast attack, and then let's crank up the ratio and bring down the threshold, and then give us some makeup gain as well. What that's going to do is squash the vocals, so it's really going to bring up any of that background noise and make it really audible.
Always giving less when I give more.
So there we have like some mouth noise.
More.
Just there. And you can also hear there's a bit of bleed from the click track, and she also takes this breath, and we can just edit all of that out.
Always giving less when I give more.
And then we just have to make sure that fades off in a natural way.
Less when I give more.
And then there's a little bit left there. We can just fade that.
Less when I give more. But baby,
And then again, getting rid of that breath just to clean it up.
Less when I give more. But baby, I believe.
You can hear as well that actually in that word, when she says more, there is a bit of mouth noise in there.
Give more.
And if we're being super picky about that, we might want to get rid of that too. So sometimes what I like to do, if I want to like deal with these issues where the click is in the middle of a word or a phrase and I can't just edit it off the end, is I'll duplicate the track and I'll insert an instance of RX declick from Isotope, and I'm not paid or sponsored by Isotope in any way to do this. It's just a really useful plugin for doing this kind of thing. And then I'll just chop that word, put it down onto this track, making sure that declick is first in the chain. And then this should do what we needed to do to clean up those clicks.
Giving less when I give more.
There's a very subtle click.
Give more.
And we turn it on.
I give more.
Just crank up the sensitivity a bit.
Giving less when I give more.
Bit more.
Giving less when I give more.
Cool. And that's cleaned it up. It's gone. So then what I'll do is just bypass those plugins, and then I can select this track, select this region, click bounce in place, and then go to selected track. And then we can just go, okay. And that's going to bounce that there. This cleaned it up. We've committed that, and we've no longer got the click.
Giving less when I give more.
And that's a super useful way of cleaning up any pops and clicks and noises that shouldn't be there. Another big part of making sure that the clicks are all gone is just to make sure that you fade off all of your regions when you cut things. So if you're doing all these cuts, just making sure that you've got a little fade at the beginning and the end of each region. And that's just going to stop any digital clicks from when the audio is maybe cutting in the middle of a chunk of audio. And just having a little fade on it at the beginning and the end is going to help make sure that you don't have any of that. But just go through and listen, use your ears, make sure that you're using your ears all the time, and check and double check everything. It's honestly is going to save you so much time later down the line if your vocals are as good as they can be and you're not having to do any editing during the mixing phase. Okay, my fifth and final point is to manually remove harshness from your vocals. What do I mean by that? Well, if we listen to this section here, you'll hear that there's a lot of sibilance in the vocal and there's a couple of harsh breaths, and we can deal with things like sibilance through using DSs and so on and so forth, but it's never as effective as just manually editing it in the first place. So let me play you a bit of this section and you'll see what I mean.
Holding on to all my dreams, and when the silence stops, I'll be right on the next train home, reaching for the sky when it gets too low to think.
Now, for the most part, there's some quite natural sounding S's in there, but there's also some kind of harsh sibilant S's, and we have these breaths as well, which are a little bit harsh. And it'd be easy to go in and say, okay, well, I'm going to put a dynamic EQ on it. I'm going to bring up soothe, and I'm going to start using soothe to smooth it all out. And then I'm going to use another de-esser, and it just ends up sounding unnatural and choked and just not very good. And we can actually just deal with these if we go in and manually edit them. So in Logic, what I can do is set this tool here, which is my command click tool, to the gain tool. Then I can use the fade tool click zones feature to make sure that I've got the marquee tool selected whenever I hover over the bottom of a region. And then I'm just going to highlight the areas that I want to just bring down a little bit in terms of volume, and that's going to help smooth them out.
Dreams, and when the silence stops, I'll be
So this S on stops,
silence, 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 stop.
let's deal with this one first. If I just highlight that with the marquee tool and then command and click and bring it down,
When the silence stops, I'll be right.
already sounds much less harsh and a bit smoother. Maybe it's a little bit too extreme.
When the silence stops, I'll be right. When the silence stops, I'll be right.
Then maybe this one too.
When the silence stops, I'll be right on the next train home, reaching for the
Then we got a breath there, which is a little harsh. We can bring that down.
on the next train home, reaching for the sky when it get on the next train home, reaching for the
You hear there's a click introduced there where we've cut the audio, so we just want to fade that again. Make sure that that's just slightly faded. We don't want it to be so much that it actually sounds like an audible fade, but just enough that it smooths off that click.
next train home, reaching for the sky when it gets too low to think. Sky when it gets too low.
Bring that down a touch.
For the sky when it gets too low to think.
And if we just take a bit of time to go through and manually turn those things down, it means that the compressors are not going to be working as hard. The DSs don't have to work as hard. We don't have to use tons of stuff like Soothe or Pro Q3 and dynamic EQ and all of this kind of stuff. We can just manually turn down the bits that are harsh, because that's ultimately all these things are doing, is just turning them down in real time and responding to sort of frequencies that are jumping out. So just go in with a clip gain tool and bring those bits down. We don't necessarily have to do it for every single vocal track in the session, but particularly on the lead vocal, making sure that it sounds as good as it can possibly sound before you start doing any mixing is going to make your mixing life so much easier. So let's just recap over those 5 points. Number one is commit your takes. Don't be working with take folders, comp folders, or playlists, whatever it may be. Work with flattened audio. It's going to be so much easier to manipulate and to get it to do what you want it to do, particularly if you're trying to like clip gain little sections and things like that and add fades. You can't do that, at least in Logic, if you're working with a comp folder. So commit your takes and work with flattened audio. Number two is clean up those takes. Go in, remove anything that shouldn't be there. If it's not adding to the vocal performance, get rid of it. And approach this sensitively, you know, be mindful of the feeling of the song and the genre and the needs of the performance. If the song requires you to leave a bit of room ambience and a bit of noise in there, sometimes that works. If you're going for something a bit more raw and a bit more kind of natural sounding, then it's good to leave some of that stuff in there, but only if it serves the song. If it doesn't serve the song, get rid of it, cut it out, clean it up, and it's going to make your life so much easier. Number three, pay attention to the breaths. As I said, this is the thing that winds me up the most when I get sent vocal takes and the breaths are all choppy and I've got to try and fix it somehow. Make sure that you're paying super close attention to the breaths. Go through and listen to them all if you have to. It does take a bit of time, but again, it's going to make your mixing life so much easier and you're going to get much better results. Number four, similar to the last point, pay attention to all the pops and the clicks, whether they're natural mouth sounds that have occurred or whether they're digital clicks from edits, or sometimes you just get a bit of digital noise in your recording chain. Maybe the mic cable's moved a little bit and you've got a bit of analog noise from the preamp, whatever it may be. They do come up quite a lot. And like I said earlier, the more compression we add, the more things like saturation and EQ boosts, all of these things are going to accentuate those sounds later on down the line. So clean them up as much as you possibly can, and it's going to make a big difference to how polished your vocal sounds at the end of it. And then lastly, take the time to manually go through and remove any harshness or things that are just not sounding very nice. Go in there, turn them down with the clip gain tool. It's a much better way of working than trying to deal with it in the mix and try and fix problems in the mix by using plugins or hardware, whatever it may be. Get in there with the tools, do it manually. You're going to get a much better, smoother sounding result if you just take the time to do these things first. So that's it. 5 very simple ways that you can improve your vocal sound and make vocal mixing much easier for yourself by just taking a little bit more time and a little bit more care in the editing process. And if you want to make sure you're getting this right and you want to make sure that you're nailing your vocals every single time, then you can check out my free vocal editing checklist, which I've left a link to in the description below. It's a very simple checklist that includes a step-by-step process that you can follow every single time to make sure that you're getting the best out of your vocals. So you can go and check that out right now. It's completely free. I've left a link below in the description, so go and check that out. In the meantime, please do give this video a thumbs up. Drop me a comment below. Let me know what you're doing in your editing process to make sure that you get the best vocal sounds you can. Before you go, please do subscribe, and I'll see you next time.